The lights of the theater felt brighter than usual as he stepped out from backstage, the polished floor reflecting everything, the judge's desk, the towering screens, the expectation hanging thick in the air. One Filipino man stood alone at center stage, adjusting the brim of his hat with 2 fingers. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't new. It looked like it had lived a life before this moment, just like him. The audience quieted, unsure what to make of his calm. No dramatic entrance, no nervous pacing, just a man who seemed perfectly comfortable waiting. Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes flicking down to his notes and then up again with polite disinterest. He'd seen thousands like this, people who walked out believing passion alone would carry them. Heidi smiled encouragingly. Sophia tilted her head, curious, while Howie watched closely, sensing something different in the stillness. The man smiled, not wide, not forced, the kind of smile you earned over time. When Simon asked who he was, his voice was steady as he introduced himself, his accent soft but clear. He explained he came from the Philippines, that music and dance had always been part of his life, woven into family gatherings and long nights where laughter mattered more than money. Then he paused, glancing toward the wings. "I'm not alone," he said simply. A ripple of confusion moved through the audience. Simon raised an eyebrow. The man didn't rush to explain. He lifted his hand and snapped once, sharp, precise. From the side of the stage emerged 2 women, walking in perfect sync. 63-year-old twins. Same height, same posture, same sparkle in their eyes. They wore matching outfits that felt timeless rather than trendy, like something pulled from an old photograph and pressed neatly for today. The crowd reacted instantly, surprised laughter, scattered applause, whispers of disbelief. Twins, at this age, on this stage. Simon leaned forward now, interest finally caught. The sisters stopped beside him, each taking 1 step forward, then back, mirroring each other so naturally it felt unpracticed, even though it clearly wasn't. The man reached up and removed his hat for a moment, placing it over his heart. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight. Family, respect, history. The twins smiled at him the way only siblings who had shared a lifetime of triumphs and disappointments could. They hadn't come to prove anything. They had come to remember who they were. Simon asked the obvious question, "Why now?" The man answered without hesitation. "Life," he said, "had a way of convincing you that some dreams expired quietly if you didn't chase them fast enough. Jobs, responsibilities, losses, distance, all reasons people stop dancing. But some dreams don't disappear. They wait." The twins nodded, eyes glistening just slightly under the stage lights. As he spoke, the audience leaned in. This wasn't a sob story. There were no dramatic pauses for sympathy. Just honesty delivered with dignity. The kind that makes you listen without realizing why. Simon glanced down the table, then back at the trio. "And what will you be doing today?" he asked, his tone guarded but curious. The man smiled again and tipped his hat back onto his head. "Old school swing." A few chuckles broke out. Swing, on this stage, at this age, but the man didn't flinch. He stood straighter, rolled his shoulders once, and for the briefest second, he looked decades younger, like someone about to step into a rhythm his body never forgot. The twins took their positions beside him, feet angled just right, hands relaxed, waiting for a beat only they could hear. The music hadn't started yet, but the energy had already shifted. Skepticism was giving way to anticipation. Simon exhaled slowly, half smiling despite himself. He gestured toward the band. "Whenever you're ready." And just before the first note would play, the man tipped his hat one last time, not to the judges, not to the crowd, but to the past that had carried them all here. The first note hit like a spark, a crisp brass sound that snapped through the theater and instantly rewrote the mood in the room. It wasn't loud or modern or overproduced, it was clean, swinging, alive. Before the audience could decide whether to laugh or lean in, the man's foot slid back, heel tapping with perfect timing, his shoulders bouncing lightly as if the rhythm had been living in him all along. The twins followed a half beat later, stepping forward together, skirts swaying in unison, their smiles widening as muscle memory took over. What started small grew fast. The man snapped his fingers twice, sharp and playful, then spun to the side, guiding one twin forward with a gentle sweep of his arm. She glided across the stage, light on her feet, posture tall and elegant, as if gravity had agreed to treat her differently. Her sister mirrored the movement on the opposite side, creating a symmetry so precise the audience gasped before they even realized why. Simon's eyebrows lifted. This wasn't nostalgia. This wasn't cute. This was real. The trio moved like a well-worn record, smooth, confident, every beat exactly where it should be. The man led with effortless charm, sliding between the twins, ducking under their arms, popping back up with a grin as they spun around him. Their timing was razor sharp. No hesitation, no stiffness. Each step landed clean, their feet tapping out rhythms that layered perfectly with the band. The audience began clapping along, first tentatively, then louder as the energy grew. People leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, smiles breaking out without permission. The twins broke into a synchronized kick sequence, legs lifting just high enough to impress but never strain, their balance flawless. 63 years old, and they moved like dancers who had never stopped. The man removed his hat mid-step, tossed it lightly into the air, and caught it behind his back without missing a beat. Laughter burst from the crowd, followed by cheers. Simon's mouth fell open just slightly before he caught himself, shaking his head in disbelief. Heidi clapped above her head, Sophia laughed openly, and Howie stared, eyes locked, as if afraid blinking might break the spell. The music shifted, swinging into a faster tempo. Instead of slowing down, the trio leaned in. The man slid across the floor on his knees, popping back up as one twin grabbed his arm and spun him upright. The other twin snapped her fingers, stepping forward with a playful strut, challenging the rhythm itself. They weren't performing at the audience, they were performing with each other, feeding off decades of shared timing and trust. Then came the break. The music cut for half a second, and all three froze mid-motion. The man tipped backward, hat angled low over his eyes, the twins posed on either side, one arm extended, the other bent sharply at the elbow. The silence was electric. Then the band slammed back in, harder, brighter, and the trio exploded into motion. The crowd erupted, feet stomped, hands clapped overhead, people stood without realizing they were standing. The twins crossed paths, switching places with a smooth slide step that looked effortless but screamed precision. The man matched them beat for beat, his footwork crisp, his upper body relaxed, radiating joy rather than effort. Simon leaned forward now, elbows on the desk, fully engaged. This wasn't about age anymore. This was about control, musicality, presence, the kind you can't fake and can't teach. As the routine built toward its finale, the man guided the twins into a final synchronized spin, then stepped back as they finished center stage together. They turned, shoulders brushing, grinning like teenagers, before snapping into a final pose just as the music hit its last sharp note. Silence. One heartbeat. Then the theater exploded. A wall of sound crashed over the stage, cheers, whistles, applause so loud it felt physical. The man placed his hat back on his head and bowed deeply. The twins grabbed each other's hands, laughing, breathless but glowing. Simon stood up, clapping hard, disbelief written openly across his face. In that moment, it was clear, this wasn't a performance people would forget. It was the kind that rewrote expectations, that reminded everyone watching that rhythm doesn't retire, and joy doesn't have an expiration date. The applause didn't fade, it swelled. It rolled through the theater in waves, louder and louder, until it felt like the walls themselves were clapping. The man stood still for a moment, hat pressed to his chest, eyes lowered as if he were listening for something beyond the noise. The twins squeezed each other's hands, shoulders rising and falling as they caught their breath, their smiles wide and unguarded. This wasn't relief, it was recognition. Simon Cowell was already on his feet, clapping harder than anyone at the table. He stopped once, laughed to himself, then shook his head slowly, the way he did when something had genuinely blindsided him. When the crowd finally quieted enough for him to speak, he leaned into the microphone, eyes locked on the trio. "I'll be honest," he said, and the audience hushed immediately. "When you walked out, I thought I knew exactly what was about to happen." He paused, letting the admission hang in the air. "I was wrong, completely wrong." The crowd reacted with cheers, but Simon raised a hand, wanting to finish. He gestured toward the twins. "You two, you have timing people half your age would kill for." Then he looked at the man, a smile creeping in despite himself. "And you didn't just dance. You led. That's rare." The man nodded respectfully, emotion flickering across his face but never overwhelming him. One of the twins wiped the corner of her eye quickly, laughing as she did it, unwilling to let the moment turn heavy. Heidi was next, leaning forward with bright eyes. She talked about joy, how it had radiated from the stage, how the audience had felt invited into something intimate and alive. Sophia chimed in, saying she forgot she was judging and just wanted to dance in her seat. Howie, unusually quiet until now, admitted he had been prepared to be polite, and instead found himself standing without realizing when it happened. Each comment fed the moment, stretching it, deepening it. The crowd listened, hanging on to every word, because this felt bigger than critique. It felt like celebration. Then Simon straightened, fingers tapping lightly on the desk. The room stilled again. Everyone knew what was coming, not the decision, but the weight of it. He looked from one twin to the other, then back to the man. "You've reminded people why this show exists," he said. "Not for perfection, for moments like this." The man exhaled slowly, a breath he'd been holding for years, not minutes. Simon's hand hovered for a fraction of a second, just enough to make the suspense unbearable, and then slammed down on the desk. The buzzer erupted in gold. The audience lost all restraint. People screamed, jumped, hugged strangers. The twins gasped in unison, hands flying to their mouths before clutching each other again, laughing and crying at the same time. The man froze, eyes wide, then bowed his head deeply, shoulders shaking as the realization hit. Confetti rained down, catching in his hat, clinging to the twins' hair, turning the stage into a storm of light. The music swelled again, triumphant and bright. Simon stood back, arms crossed now, watching with a satisfied smile, as if even he were surprised by his own reaction. The man finally looked up, eyes shining. He took the twins' hands and lifted them high, not as a victory gesture, but as a thank you, to the years they had waited, to the nights they had danced in kitchens instead of spotlights, to the belief they never let go of even when no one was watching. As they left the stage, still holding hands, the crowd continued cheering, unwilling to let the moment end. Backstage, the noise faded into a distant roar, but the feeling didn't. This wasn't just advancement in a competition. It was permission, proof that dreams don't have deadlines, and that sometimes the biggest surprises come from people who were never supposed to surprise anyone at all. And somewhere in the audience, someone older sat a little straighter, smiled a little wider, and thought, maybe it's not too late after all.